So you're trying to figure out what your first deck should be in teppen. Now, first things first, I gotta say, if there's a hero that you like, I would definitely just go with that. A big part of having fun with games is the fun part. And so if you really want to play a certain hero, I would just go with that. I think it's gonna make your time a little bit more enjoyable. But let's get into my guide on helping you figure out what your first deck should be. There's gonna be 3 things we go over in this video: the different types of decks in teppen, what colors are kind of associated with what types of decks, and should you play dual color or not. So there are 4 main types of decks in teppen. If you're an avid card gamer, you might be familiar with them. There is aggro, and like its name, it's aggressive. You want to finish games quickly. You focus on buffing up your units, protecting them, and potentially using some sort of evasion like flight or unblockable to get extra damage in. On the other side, you've got control decks, which use a lot of disruption like destroys, return to the EX pocket, to slow down the game, stall the game out to the late game, where you either win in time because you have a life advantage, or with big late game powerhouse units that your opponent will just crumble under in the late game. And the next 2 types of decks are kind of a mix between these two. They kind of sit in the middle of the range between aggro and control. First is tempo. This uses evasion units like aggro to get some slow chip damage, but uses disruption like control to stop your opponent from trying to play their game plan, and kind of goes with that route. Keep your opponent on the back foot while you get your damage in. And then the other type of deck, the last one we have, is mid-range, which can also be called big in teppen. There's a lot of like big resonate, big green, etc. And these types of decks take the route of kind of control with the late game, where you tend to use a lot of high-costed threats, which happen to dodge a lot of removal in the game because it's like low MP based. So it's easier for you guys to stick around. Your opponent has to deal with them, and you're going to go ahead and be protecting those ones and kind of buffing them up if you need to, kind of like an aggro deck does. So we've got the 4 types of decks: aggro, tempo, mid-range or big, and control. So now that you know about those types of decks, let's talk about colors. First, let's talk about red. Red specializes in doing direct damage, whether it's to units, whether it's to players. It's all about doing that extra bit of direct damage. This specialization in damage lets red excel at the types of decks like control and tempo. One example of a control deck is Denjin Renki from Ryu, which buffs the damage of all the units and actions in your hand, so you can get some massive damage out on the field and control the game. On the flip side, if you want to play tempo, a hero art like Amaterasu's Great Divine Intervention is great at wiping the field and just whittling down your opponent's threats, so they need to consistently play something to block. Next up is green. Green focuses on buffing and protecting your units, as well as powerful combo plays. This lends it towards aggro playstyles and big mid-range playstyles. For big mid-range playstyles, of course, you're gonna have some high-costed, heavy-hitting units your opponent need to deal with, or they're gonna run away with the game. But to stop them on their way, you've got shields, you've got buffs, and sometimes you can even place a new copy of that unit right in the same spot when they finally are able to kill it. If you're looking to play green as an aggro playstyle, you're going to want to use a lot of their powerful combo plays using multiple units to create massive buffs and set up boards very quickly. There's some great examples with Coordination and with Quest Green for this. These types of aggro decks can set up huge fields at the beginning of the game when they wait for 10 MP, and then bah, you gotta watch out for those aggro decks. Next, we'll talk about purple. Purple excels in disrupting and stalling your opponent. You have cards that return your opponent's unit to the EX pocket. You've got halts, which straight up prevent your opponent's unit from attacking for a certain amount of time, as well as being the only color with the ability to negate actions. This lends it extremely well to tempo and control styles similar to red. You can return pesky threats, you can stop them from attacking, waiting out to the late game where you win with some powerful units and synergies. That's going to be your control route, or you can utilize your negates and as well as a surprising amount of flight and evasion in purple to go for a tempo style, which is going to keep your opponent on their toes. And finally, we're going to talk about black. Black excels in using the graveyard. You can return cards from your graveyard back to your EX pocket. You can revive them straight back from the graveyard. And of course, a lot of destruction. This is going to lend black towards big mid-range as well as control playstyles. There's a lot of control going around, huh? Anyway, black can just destroy, join the destroy wave, as they call it, and frustrate your opponents, making it to the late game where you utilize effects to bring back things from the graveyard, revenge, which lets you reuse your units as well to just dominate that late game. On the flip side, you can go with a big or revenge style playstyle, which is really common for Wesker's Ouroboros hero art, bringing back your biggest, most powerful units from the grave over and over and over until your opponent can't deal with it anymore. As you may have noticed, when you add multiple colors in your teppen deck, your max MP gets reduced. So that means if you have 2 colors in your deck, you can only have a max MP of 5 instead of 10. This basically prevents dual color decks from having big and control playstyles. What that means is that dual color is the home of aggro decks and a few tempo decks as well. This is especially powerful because you can combine the best attributes from 2 colors, such as using cards with evasion from purple alongside powerful protection and buffs from either green or black. If you're interested in an aggro playstyle, dual color is probably going to be the way for you. Now, you might get some advice to avoid dual color decks in the beginning because they're a little bit different to play than your traditional monocolor decks, but they also have an upside which is pretty good for your first deck of typically being cheaper to construct in terms of souls and what cards you need. So we've talked about playstyles and what color or colors you might want to include in your first teppen deck. So my final tip for you is to go for what is more like a timeless playstyle. Decks that have consistently proven themselves to work throughout many different metas in teppen, one of the most famous of which being Big Resonate. It just doesn't seem to go anywhere. And if you'd like to see more of these timeless decks, you can check out this video where I go over a few deck builds of each color which have stood the test of time. My purple shirt doesn't fit.